We'll get started.
I think you have to raise your voice a little bit.
Good evening. We'll get started. The topic of today is about Exodus, and we are revisiting this important topic because it's, as you will see, it's a very controversial issue, and why Misr of the scriptures could not have been Egypt that we know today. From the color of these soldiers, you can have a hint about what I'll be talking about. The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge. Stephen Hawking. As you know, the first modern Old Testament translation to Arabic was completed in 1856. It was initiated by Mr. and Mrs. Smith and was completed by Dr. Van Dyke, who was a pathologist at the American University of Beirut in the 19th century. All went well until Dr. Kamal Salibi in 1986 shocked the media with his book. The Bible came from Arabia, many of you are aware of. Indicated the Rosetta Stone. So I transliterated the square Aramaic into a 22 Arabic. Attempted in the second line to do a reading of the text. So this I was reading, and the meaning was. This was the first line was square Aramaic. The third line was the Van Dyke translation, and I assumed that Biblical Hebrew was a newly discovered language, possibly related to Arabic. And I ignored all traditional Masoretic diacritics and the use of Hebrew dictionaries. I started from a dictum that if Arabic and Syriac were initially written in 22-letter scripts without diacritical dots. This is a page from the Quran from the 7th century. It is undotted, no diacritics, and this is a Syriac text. So I worked on the second line. I started reading the scriptures in full 28 Semitic letters. I said, although we received them in 22 Aramaic letters, however, they should be like Old Arabic and like Syriac, they should be read in full 28 Semitic letters. This is something which the Masoretes did not do over 7 centuries, between the 5th century and the 12th century AD. It took me 11 years to discover that the language is not standard Arabic of today, but the vernacular of Hijaz. So exactly as Haim Rabin had noted. This is how the text looked. The first one was a 22-letter Aramaic. I wrote it in Arabic. The third line was the translation of Van Dyke, and the one you see. The second line was my reading. So I started reading 28, knowing the Hijazi vernacular through my marriage, I was able to see the link. So the conclusion at the end was that line 2 was truly the Arabic of ancient Western Arabia. I presented this to Dr. Salibi in the summer of 2011. I took for him Genesis 16. I read it. I told him this is not a translation, and this is not. This is. I'm reading it to you from directly from the Bible. There were the names of 3 geographic places: Al-Burud, Hira, and Qadis, which were in Mecca. I took for him a primitive map of Mecca, where these 3 places showed. So he said, I want to do a peer review for your study. Give me some time. 40 days later, he called me and he said, I endorse the methodology and the results. And present to specialists only after completion. He said, your geographic coordinates are more accurate than mine, and you are the one who will continue my work. And sadly, he passed away 1 week later. In summer in the winter of 2020, just at the beginning of the lockdown, I published the first book, the Corona lockdown, just 1 week before the lockdown. So I took a sabbatical leave from medical practice in 2021 and worked to complete the work on 247 chapters that related to history in the Old Testament. And these were taken from Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Samuel 1 and 2, and Kings 1 and 2. And in 2022, I published Al-Turath al-Ma'thur, Old Heritage.
They're complaining they can't see your face.
It won the first award at the Beirut International Book Fair because I used the trilinear technique, which is a first in the Arabic literature, and because I employed a QR link to a dedicated Google Earth project. So instead of using maps, I used Google Earth, and this is the QR code, and if you enter it, even with your mobile, you can reach 330 sites in real time. So it was, the first book was a bestseller for 3 years, and the second book was also a bestseller in 2022. So I was encouraged to translate it into English, and this is what I did, and it was published in 2023. So the results of the research was that Palestine was not the promised land. The scriptures were of Arab origin, and the Israelites were tribes of ancient Western Arabia. Majority stayed in Arabia, became Muslim 14 centuries ago, and today are among prominent Saudi Arab nationals. So the Old Testament is simply the chronicles of ancient Arabia. And we can distinguish between two eras: an Israelite era covering the 19th century till the 5th century BCE, and this encompasses the eras of all the prophets, and this was in Arabia, centered around Mecca, and this is the actual Holy Land, according to the new reading, from the valley of Misraim to Far'at al-Jazal. It's not from, we cannot translate this from the Nile to the great Euphrates River. In the vernacular of Kinana, which is the lip of Canaan, according to Isaiah 19:18, the letter Ayn is effaced to a great degree. So Canaan becomes Kinana, Iwaj becomes Waj, Imad becomes Imad, Amara becomes Amara, Asfur becomes Safur, and Far'at becomes Furat. And there's another era, the Jewish era. This is truly, it was centered around Palestine between 5th century BCE and 2nd century of the current era. The geography was falsified during the Seleucid rule. I'm sure many of you would have wanted to ask this question. It is well illustrated in the book. So this was in Palestine. Palestine was not the promised land. There are more than 50 proofs in the book, the Mecca Bible book, based on details from the Holy Scriptures. And the subject of today is just one of those 50. So we have to doubt the geography and not the historicity of the Scriptures. Egypt was not Misraim of the Scriptures. Misraim is in the form of plural, meaning it is the plural of Misr, which means state. Where was it? We have few pieces of evidence which I will narrate in chronologic order. So the first time Misr was mentioned in the Bible, it coincided with the first mention of camels. And if you've read the Old Testament, camels are frequently mentioned in the era of the first patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. But no wall images of camels can be seen in Egyptian temples. Maybe some of you have gone on the Nile cruise and they've seen the great temples of Egypt. There are no drawings of camels anywhere in these temples. The Professor William Foxwell Albright, an American archaeologist, came after World War II from Johns Hopkins to the Middle East. He visited the Middle East, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Syria. Curiously, he studied the bones of animals, collected bones of animals and sent them to Chicago for carbon-14 dating. And he came up with a dictum based on his findings that no camels outside of Arabia and East Arabia existed or were in use before the 11th century BCE. So before 11th century BCE, which encompasses the eras from Abraham to Moses, there were no camels outside Arabia and East Africa. The caravan routes that we see here were much later. There is no documentation of camel presence in Egypt until the Persian era, after the Cambyses invasion in 525 BCE. Curiously enough, the only national flag that we can find the camel on is the Republican flag of Eritrea today. If we compare names in the Bible and the Egyptian sources, there is no mention of names Misr, Pharaoh, Pharaoh, or Sinai in Egyptian inscriptions, on papyrus scrolls, or the history of in the books of century BCE, nor pre-Egypt from the earliest dynasties until the Greek conquest of Egypt, and he doesn't mention Misr. Egypt, the name of Egypt in all these is Hakita, Kimet, or Tawi. And the name of the king was referred to as Nesso or Neb. Sinai was referred to as Mafka, which is famous for its turquoise and copper mines. Lebanon is a multi-religious country. This puts us at a great advantage because comparative studies are easy and common. So that's why I will be making quotations from the Quran as well as the Old Testament. So according to the Quran, the Misr of the scriptures had no pyramids. In chapter 40, verse 36, Pharaoh said, "O Haman," he was his grand vizier, prime minister, "construct for me a tower that I might reach the ways into the heavens, so that I may look at the deity of Moses. But indeed, I think he is a liar." This could not have been in Egypt, because Egypt had the highest man-constructed monument ever until the erection of the Eiffel Tower in 1889. So this is one piece of evidence. Another piece of evidence, the Exodus. It could not have been under the 18th dynasty, because the 18th dynasty, the Tutmosid dynasty, was the history of Egypt. It controlled Egypt, Syria, parts of Turkey, and North Arabia. So, and there is no Exodus recorded in its archives. And also, there are no biblical account of any Misri forces in Sinai. We encountered a single Misri soldier. And furthermore, how could Joshua have invaded Palestine and conquered Palestine with the presence of the Egyptian imperial forces occupying the whole Levant? Even archaeologists Herzog, Silberman, and Finkelstein said there could not have been an exodus from Egypt. We know it, probably the government knows it, but the commoners do not know it. They said that the scriptures probably are pure mythology. However, Zaif Herzog stated an intelligent opinion. He said, or we are in the wrong place. And he was right. So even for unbelievers, it is hard to imagine that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who was an illiterate shepherd, collaborated with Moses, peace be upon him, to produce unfounded but compatible stories 2 millennia later. The number of Israelites in the Exodus cannot be 600,000 as portrayed. This is just an example of Arab exaggeration. We know it. Until like 600,000 مرة, don't do it. If Jacob and his family numbered 70 on entering Misr, under normal conditions, his progeny would have reached on 3,000 to 4,000 10 generations later. We can easily calculate it from a well-known formula that scholars working on population issues use. So these pictures are exaggeration of what happened. Also, in Exodus, the Israelites were guided by, this is what the Old Testament tells us. Obviously, these phenomena were not supernatural miracles, but active volcanoes. These were the columns of smoke during the day, and these were the towers of fire they saw at night. But there are no volcanoes in Egypt or Sinai. Again, wrong geography, not supernatural phenomena taking place in Egypt. So where were Egypt, even Mount Sinai, it's not a volcano. Today, it's quote unquote Mount Sinai. In the scriptures, it is described as a volcano. Where are the volcanoes in the Middle East? Volcanoes are abundant in Ethiopia and in Hijaz. This is the tectonic map of Ethiopia. All these small red triangles represent volcanoes. Also in Arabia, West Arabia, all said Mount Sinai was also a volcano. This is how you are in the box. This is how, if you enlarge the picture, this is how you see it. You can see I encircled the mountain and the lava around it. Also, the locations mentioned in Exodus, which are supposed to be in Egypt, are actually all in Ethiopia, not in Egypt. We have Metira, Debu in Eritrea, Aksum in Tigray region of Ethiopia, Sekota in Amhara, Adama in Oromia, فتمني in Amhain in Tigray, Abi Rametz in Tigray, Danakil and Afar, and Sefani in Oromia. All these are Ethiopian regions. Another piece of evidence, traditionally the Israelites were in the eastern delta, and Pharaoh was in Thebes, which is today's Luxor, was the capital of Egypt throughout the second millennium BCE. So how did Pharaoh overtake the Israelites within days? This is the delta up, and the red dot down is where Luxor is. It should take weeks and weeks for an army to mobilize to reach the western Sinai or the east part of the delta. How the crossing is depicted, it was a crossing at a sea. But why would Moses ignore the area in the north here where Egypt was connected to Sinai and go to a place near the sea and wait for a miracle? This is not logical. Also, at the farewell sermon, Moses warned the Israelites that if they did not stay faithful to the law of the covenant, they shall return to Egypt in ships. Okay, in ships, which is very strange. Why should they go back in ships? Palestine, Sinai, and Egypt were connected by land before the Suez Canal was constructed. So where was the great crossing? The great crossing must have been at a compulsory waterway. Where was it? We have this piece of information from Quran, chapter 18. It was the union of the two seas. And there is one area in the Middle East that satisfies this description, which is Bab al-Mandab, between Yemen and Djibouti today. The others cannot be described at all as the union of the two seas. Majma al-Bahrain in the world. In Yemen today, near Bab al-Mandab, there is a place called the Rock of Moses, still. So apparently it's in the folk stories. It is still in the memory, in the folk memory of the people of Yemen. So they crossed over to Yemen and went to the area south of Mecca, 400 kilometers. This is where through Sinai was. It is a miracle. The crossing is a miracle. But as you remember, we spoke about volcanoes erupting. So with the volcanoes, we always have earthquakes. If earthquakes take place under the sea, what will happen? There will be a great ebb due to the undersea earthquakes, and it seems the lower part of the great African rift was witnessing a great volatility. So Pharaoh and the Egyptian army must have drowned by a tsunami wave, which followed the great ebb. Also, more pieces of information. In the Quran, it says that the people, children of Israel, inherited Misr in chapter 26. Thus, and we caused to inherit it, that is Misr, the children of Israel. But we know that this never happened in the history. Also, when they speak about from Euphrates to the Nile, meaning from the great river in Iraq to the Nile River, the history of the dynasties in Egypt, the 21st and 22nd Egyptian dynasties, is well written. It doesn't say at all that the Israelites reached to the Nile. Same thing in the history and records of the Assyrian Empire. There are no records that anybody reached the Euphrates from the west. There is no mention whatsoever for this illusionary kingdom that extended from Egypt to Iraq. So, nevertheless, these are not man-made stories, but because from the history, old history of Ethiopia, what do we know? The Lion of Judah, the son of Solomon and Queen of Sheba, ruled Ethiopia. Also, another piece of information that the Danites, who were a tribe of the 12 Israelite tribes, escaped to Ethiopia at the Nebuchadnezzar invasion of Jerusalem, which, by the way, was not in Palestine. If we look, if we review the histories of Arab historians such as Tabari, Mas'udi, and Al-Hamadani, they say that Nebuchadnezzar actually came to Mecca and he destroyed Arabia, and he took the people of West Arabia into exile to Babylonia. Now, the distance between Mecca and Eritrea, Musawwa, Shuaiba is the harbor of Mecca, and Musawwa is the harbor of Eritrea. It's only 500 kilometers apart, so sail ships can cross it in 2 or 3 days. And this continued. Ethiopia continued to be a place of refuge from the days of Abraham until the days of Muhammad, when the first Muslims were abused in Mecca. The first place they went to was to Eritrea. They went to Ethiopia to escape the torture that they had in Mecca. So, and they always went by boat. So this is also, we should know that navigation in the north part of the Red Sea was not possible until Roman times. If you want, we can later. So it is impossible that the Danites had escaped from near Aqaba, from Eilat to reach Ethiopia. So Arabia, Isaiah predicted and the Quran confirmed that Misr was destroyed. This Misr of the Old Testament was destroyed. In Isaiah, I will quote him shortly, and in the Surah Ash-Shu'ara, here in وَدَمَّرْنَا مَا كَانَ يَصْنَعُ فِرْعَوْنُ وَمَا كَانُوا يَعْرِشُونَ, says, so the word of your Lord, the finest, was fulfilled for the children of Israel because of their patience. And we destroyed the edifices and towers of Pharaoh and whatsoever they manufactured. However, what do we find in Egypt of today? We see that the monuments are still existing. The pyramid and the Sphinx, the Hatshepsut temple in Luxor is still standing, it's not destroyed. The temple at Edfu, the great temple at Karnak is still extant, and the Dendera temple, the Abu Simbel, the Elephantine are all still standing in front of us. Again, not mythology, but wrong geography. But where was the true alternative? Which city was destroyed? The true seat of power of Pharaoh actually was Metira, which is near Sana'a in Eritrea. It was destroyed by Esarhaddon, the king of Assyria, as foretold by Isaiah chapter 11, 15 to 16. Okay, this is the green area here is where the true Misr was the seat of power of Pharaoh. And these are the great ruins of that place. because everybody thought that the Israelites were in Egypt at one time, then in Palestine, then they were taken to exile to Babylon. All the excavations of the 19th century and all the investment went to those countries, and Ethiopia was completely ignored. One of the other pieces of evidence are the phylacteries, tama'im, on the foreheads and arms of Israelites in Sinai. That is before the law was given to Moses. Look at what this rabbi has on his forehead. Look at this one also, this black cube. Look at his left arm. Look at this piece of leather strapped 7 times around his left arm in counterclockwise fashion. What does it remind us of? The Kaaba and the circumambulation. When we enter a mosque as Muslims, we have to do 2 rak'ahs, 2 courses of prayer in respect to the mosque, except for the mosque, the mosque in Mecca. When we reach the house of Allah, we do circumambulation 7 times. We don't pray rak'ats on arrival. So the 7 courses of circumambulation are the form of respect to the house of Allah, and it is done in counterclockwise fashion. So, and this ritual dates back to the time of Abraham. So the children of Israel knew about it all along during their course in Egypt and in Sinai. Another piece of evidence, the Israelites had cattle in Sinai. This is confirmed in the Bible and in the Quran. إن الله يأمركم أن تذبحوا بقرة إن البقرة تشابه علينا. However, cattle cannot survive in present-day Sinai due to its very dry nature. Okay, so more details about the kind of cows in Quran chapter 2. The Israelite children of Israel said to Moses, "Call upon Lord to show us what is her color, the color of the cow." He said, "It is a yellow cow, bright in color, pleasing to the observers." He says also, God, "It is a heifer, neither trained to plow the earth nor to irrigate the field, one free from fault with no spot upon her." And one finds these yellow cows in Tihama, still trained to plow the earth and irrigate the fields. This was sent to me by one of my Twitter account followers from his village in Tihama. The yellow cows, and they are still in use in plowing the earth and in irrigating the fields. We're getting to the end. The book of Numbers 33 is about the years of wandering, and 34 stations are mentioned. These are a nightmare for biblical scholars because they were unable to identify any in Sinai. Sinai is a very dry peninsula with very, very little places for survival. When looking in the right place, one can find these places. In the books, I was able to identify 30 of these stations, and they are still in existence by their names, and they are in the Tihama of Qumfuda area, 350 to 380 kilometers south of Mecca. Okay, this is again the Google Earth project, and maybe this is the last one. The Egyptians used hieroglyphic and hieratic scripts to write their language. Whereas people of Palestine use cuneiform script. And Moses, nobody says at all that Moses wrote in cuneiform or in hieroglyphic. So, and Aramaic or Phoenician was not yet in existence in the 14th century. in the days of Moses. So what form of writing did Moses use to write the Bible? We know that he learned how to read and write in Egypt, but where was this Egypt and what form of writing did he use? The only script used from ancient times on both sides of the Red Sea was the Zaburi script, more known in its inscriptions from as Musnadi. We have two forms. We have the soft form for writing on leather. This is the soft form, and we have the royal form for wall inscriptions. So this is what Moses used to write the Old Testament and the tablets. Final conclusion, Misr was the United States of Ethiopia and Yemen. And Exodus could not have been from Egypt to Sinai and Palestine, from Egypt to Sinai and then to Palestine, because the term Exodus even is inappropriate to use. When people move from one part of an empire to another, we cannot say that they exited. They are still within the same empire. So even the term Exodus is not inappropriate. And this is the land of old Misr. But most of the events that we know of were on the African side. On the eastern side, we know only about the Queen of Sheba and the boundaries of the Holy Land as narrated in the Bible from the valley of Misraim to Far'at al-Jazal, in the exact words, Minhal al-Misraim, which is today Wadi Hali, today in Tihama, to Far'at al-Jazal, which is a valley north of Medina in Saudi Arabia. These are the boundaries of the Holy Land in West. It is maybe 15 to 18 times as big as Palestine. I can't see how they were able to fit all these names in tiny Palestine. We have over 1,000 names of villages and cities. And this is the Kaaba of Mecca. If you want to know why I chose it as the cover for my book, we can do that at the end. And thank you very much for your attention. Questions are welcome. Did we exceed the time? It is a controversial problem. Many people think that it is not true, but the contrary is not true. If you know enough, you know that the traditional geography cannot be true at all. So if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer if I can.
So the Jews should have gone to Palestine? I don't know.
This is fortunately. It is.
So who decided that Misr was Egypt?
Who decided?
Yes.
This you see, until the days of Herodotus in the 5th century, nobody knew anything. Nobody knew about this word, Misr. Herodotus stayed in our area for 7 years. He came to write the history of the Tyrians of Sur here. And then he got interested. He went to Egypt and he wrote the history of Egypt. And then he went to Babylonia and he wrote the history of Mesopotamia. Of course, he wrote the history of this area as well. He did not mention anything about Judea, Israel, Abraham, Moses, David. He never heard of these And he did not mention a single city or village that appears in the Old Testament because they were not here. Now, the only area which he did not visit was Arabia. He was a contemporary of Ezra, believe it or not, the one who compiled the Old Testament. If they had met, they were contemporary. But one was in the Levant, Herodotus, and Ezra was in Mecca. They never met. If they had met, I'm sure Herodotus would have loved to publish the Old Testament and to introduce it to the West. Now, why did the history change? When did it change? This is the big question. I narrowed it down to the beginning of the Seleucid rule of Palestine. See, Palestine was under the Ptolemaic rule. You know, after Alexander the Great, the kingdom was divided. So the Ptolemies ruled Egypt and Palestine at the beginning, and the Seleucids ruled Syria and Iraq. Palestine was a land of battle for many, many years among the two. In 282, the Ptolemies translated the Old Testament into Greek because they wanted to please their affluent Jewish community, and Ptolemy III wanted to add this great history book to his Alexandrian library. Okay, so he asked his subordinates in Palestine to send him all the people who were fluent in Old Hebrew. They found only 70 people. In all of his kingdom, they found only 70 or 72 people who were able to read the Old Testament in its original form. This is why they call it the Septuagint, which means the 70, Sab'iniya, Arabic. And it is said that after they finished this work, he burned all the scrolls and the documents, the Hebrew documents, and probably a generation later, these 70 must have died. Now, 1 century later, in 182, the Seleucids took over Palestine from the Ptolemies, but they oppressed the Jews, and they abolished the law. They abolished circumcision. And they, between 172 and 162, they killed all the scholars, the Jewish scholars, all the rabbis, and also they translated the Old Testament into Aramaic, and they burned all the Hebrew documents. They even took over the position of the great rabbi. So for 10 years, until the Maccabees revolted. The Hasmoneans, the Maccabees. The Hasmoneans are actually Hashemites. In Greek, if you trace the meaning, you see that it goes back to Hashem. In Greek, for ease, they call them Hasmoneans. Hashem means the name, representing the great name of God. Maccabees means Maccawis, Meccans. So they were Hashemites, believers in God, and they came over from Mecca to Palestine. They did not accept what the Seleucids did, so they revolted, and the first Maccabean war started, and later they settled, they gave them internal, they allowed them to have internal rule, autonomy under the sovereignty of the Seleucid Empire. When they translated the Old Testament into Aramaic, they changed the geography. So Palestine now became Canaan, and Misr became Egypt, and Syria became Aram. Aram means the high land. This is what it means. Actually, it is the Najd of Saudi Arabia. This is the first Arameans were the people of Najd, We spoke about it in the previous presentation, where Noah was and where the first Arameans were. So they emigrated from the highland of Najd of East Arabia to Syria and to North Iraq. So they translated the Old Testament into Aramaic, and again they burned whatever they could find of old Jewish. And after killing all the scholars, people were not learned. Very few people were learned those days. So after killing the scholars, the only people who revolted and did not accept this were the Essenes in the west bank of Jordan. They knew the truth. They lived in seclusion, and they kept their point of prayer to Mecca. They refused to change their prayer to and make it to Jerusalem. This is the point when things changed, the Seleucid times. If you want it very specific, I think between 172 and 162, everything changed. Following that, they started projecting biblical names on Palestinian and Syrian villages. It started from then. Before the 2nd century BCE, nothing was known about this area as a representative of biblical. It was just a land of migration for the people who came from Mecca. But little by little, they became the reference point. Jerusalem became the reference point.
Our Zoom friends want you to summarize the question from the audience because they can't hear it. So when there is a question, we can summarize it.
Okay. Next.
Sexual discrimination.
Yes, according to your study report, we could not emulate the report. We could not emulate the place where the glanced at the Holy Land. According to your study.
Mount Nebo. Mount Nebo is Dahr al-Ghada in. The question is, where would Mount Nebo be today? I went in maybe 15 years ago to Jordan, and I went to Mount Nebo. And I told the guy there, I said, it is not true. He said, why? I said, read the text. It tells you that you can see the lands of Judah from here. I can't see the lands of Judah from here. They are mostly behind the mountains of the West Bank. And furthermore, it says that you can see the Great Sea, which is supposedly the Mediterranean. If you stand on Mount Nebo in Jordan, you cannot see the Mediterranean. However, in the region of Dahr al-Ghada in Zahran of Saudi Arabia, it's maybe 2,000 meters high, south of Taif. Dahr al-Ghada, no Dahran. Dahr al-Ghada in Zahran. Zahran. Zahran, south of Taif, near Baha, in the Baha region. It is a mountainous area, 2,000 meters high. This is where Moses stood. From there, you can see the Red Sea indeed, and you can see a great piece of the land of Judah. And on the east side, you can see all the sites that he remembered. Sughra and the city of palms and whatever. I have illustrated this in my books, in my Arabic and English books. If you want, I went through all these points. Yes, sir.
So in other words, we are talking about the children came from that area.
The Israelites were there, and most of them stayed. Very few migrated, and the great majority of Jews today are converts. As I said, ethnically, we can do now the haplogroup studies, which is, by the way, prohibited in Israel, because it is a catastrophe. It will show that more than 90% of the people are not of Israelite origin. This is science. ما في واسطة. You cannot play with this. So they themselves were among the first to work on this field, the haplogroups, the DNA, and they decided that probably the group that represents the DNA of Abraham is the J1. Why? The Levites, the religious people, are the ones that kept most of the covenant by not marrying outside the Israelite tribes. So around 45%, only 45% of them, and this is the highest among all the tribes, 45% of them are J1 today. So they said this is the DNA of Abraham. When the DNA started to flourish, especially with what the National Geographic did, they mapped all the nations of the world. They discovered that most of the Jews everywhere were not of Semitic origin. So,
The question, the lady.
so
Please repeat it after Michelle Zoom.
okay.
تفضل.
ممكن احكي بالعربي؟
Okay, feel free.
بس ملاحظة صغيرة بعض التدريبات في السودان بالنسبة لمواصفات السولجرز أيام الفراعنة اللي كانت أول صورة إنه black people with braids
Black people with
braids
braids.
جدولة وهذه المواصفات موجودة في اثيوبيا والسودان. الشيء الثاني الابقار. هذه الابقار موجودة بالسودان وهي تسمى ابقار كنانة. وهي
أبقار كنانة. So brought from Arabia, again from West Arabia.
أو العكس. ربما هم أخذوا هي نفس الأبقار في إثيوبيا وفي السودان وتحديدا منطقة السودان. والأبقار في تلك المناطق لا تستخدم في الزراعة.
لا تستخدم في الزراعة.
الأحرف ولا التركيب الساقية للبريد. هي أبقار فقط للحليب
أوكي.
الشيء الثاني عندما تعرض فرعون أصبح build something high for me. The pyramids in Sudan, they are smaller than the ones in Egypt, but they are more. They are all pyramids in Sudan and Egypt. They are like 220 pyramids. They are smaller. And maybe he asked him that to build something bigger than the ones already in Sudan or basically they were. الشيء الثالث موسى في سورة الكهف يفتخر
الخضر
الخضر عليه السلام في ملتقى البحرين
مجمع البحرين.
مجمع البحرين there is a man who said that this is where the two Niles, the Blue Nile and the White Nile meet, which is yes. Thank you.
Okay. I know that, but the whole, you have to put the whole story together. So again, Sudan does not fit. I know about somebody who thought that Sudan could be the alternative geography, but it cannot. And also having pyramids, this rules out that Sudan was the land of Pharaoh. He was further south. Today, after the division between Eritrea and Ethiopia, Metira became inside the Eritrean borders. And the children of Israel were actually in Exum. That land was chosen by Pharaoh himself. He recommended the land of Exum to Joseph. He told them, let your father and your brothers take their cattle to Exum, which is not far from Metira, because it will suit their purpose. So I've studied all possibilities since 1984. I studied all the possibilities. The most possible story is the one that I wrote. It still stands against all odds. I tried to challenge it myself since 2000, but it is still standing firm. You're welcome.
When you talk to your scholar friends in Europe, so when you talk to your scholar friends in Europe or in the US, what is their first reaction to findings that you have? Because we live in a very sensitive period right now. It's very exclusive in terms. What do they say? They try to challenge the findings. What are their reactions?
I wrote to many journals, but and I even spoke to some people at universities. They said, please don't get us involved. We'll be in trouble. Truly, they said, we cannot, we will lose our sponsorship if we go into this topic. So apparently the Zionist influence is very strong. And somebody told me that a few months after I published the first book, it was under scrutiny and revision inside Israel. But it seems they chose to ignore it in order not to make a big publicity about it, because they know they are in the wrong place. But what shall they tell their people? Sorry, we brought you to the wrong place. So they have a big problem. There is a catch. If they want to accept Mecca as the alternative to present-day Jerusalem, there is a catch. You see, they like Muslims, they say there is no God but God, and Moses is the interlocutor with God, and they pay alms. You know how much they pay for their Jewish institutions, how much money they contribute to Israel. They pray 3 times a day. We pray 5 times a day. And they fast certain days. We fast the month of Ramadan. But they pray towards Jerusalem and they go to pilgrimage to Jerusalem. This is the only difference. If they choose, if they say, yes, we accept that Mecca is the Qibla of the Kabbalah, the Qibla, the point of orientation at prayer, and this is where we should go to perform our pilgrimage, then they become Muslims. They were on very good terms with Muhammad in Medina for 1.5 years, until the revelation came that he should change his point of prayer to Mecca and no more to Jerusalem. In the first years of Islam, when prayer was ordained, their prayer, when Muslims prayed, they were facing Jerusalem. But after Muhammad moved to Medina, 1.5 years later, the revelation came that you should change your you should change face Mecca during prayer because this is the place where Abraham was. This is the Qibla, the direction of prayer of Abraham. So he was ordained to change. So when he did this, he started to have problems with the Jews of Medina. And the fights started. Some of them believed in him. They accepted Islam. They accepted that Mecca was the Qibla of Ibrahim, but the majority did not. And at the end, they were forced to leave Arabia and go to Syria and Iraq. So if they were to accept what I'm saying, then they become Muslims. So many people have asked me this question: isn't it dangerous now if we tell them that it's Mecca and not Jerusalem, that they will think of occupying Saudi Arabia or going to Mecca? I said no. There is a big catch to that. If they accept it, then they become Muslims. So no problem then. I'm a Muslim living in Lebanon. I don't claim Mecca. I don't have to go and live in Mecca. I can go to Mecca anytime I want, but it's not necessary. And after all, DNA, as we said, has proved that they are not the descendants of Israelites. Actually, the descendants of the Israelites, if you take the Zionist logic, most of them are in Saudi Arabia today, and the DNA studies can prove it. Are you still recording? Hey, after we stop the recording, if you want, I can tell you about some of the prominent families in Arabia that are of Israelite origin. But
Okay. Thank you very much for something. And you sorted something out which has been fascinating me for a while. A while back, I saw a documentary about a British gentleman who was lived in Saudi Arabia with his wife. You probably know. I'm sure around certain circles. And what he said fascinated me. He said that the real Qibla is more towards Petra because when they refurbished the old mosques, all the mihrab pointed towards Petra and not towards Mecca. And he quoted a lot of things that could not have been in Mecca, but could have been in Jordan. And he lives in Saudi Arabia. He's lived there for a long time. I don't know if that makes any sense.
This is not true, because it's well documented that the first mosques ever were in Saudi Arabia. And the Qibla in those mosques are very well delineated. Nothing has changed. So forget about outside Arabia. We have the mosques in the Mecca area and in Medina, and they all point towards.
How would they let him then go on the documentary in Saudi Arabia? Because he was next to a sheikh from Saudi Arabia.
You have to look at how accurate were the architects who constructed those mosques in those days. But people in Medina, where Muhammad lived, they knew exactly where Mecca was, and there are many mosques in Medina. The only one that has two qiblas is the one of is the mosque of the two qiblas. And if you go inside, you will see that there are two mihrabs, one pointing toward Jerusalem, and the other one is facing Mecca. And all the other mosques, the mihrab where the sheikh, the leader in prayer, stands, they are all in the face of Mecca. So I don't think this is true at all. We go by the oldest, by history. The oldest mosques were in Mecca and Medina, and by continuity, nothing has changed. They were facing towards Mecca. It's well documented. Islam came in a period of documented history. Everything was written down. There are no mysteries. And if there were mistakes in the direction, probably it was the geographical orientation of the one who constructed the mosque, not the concept itself. Definitely not Petra. It was all along the house of God, which everybody knew by continuity from the days of Abraham. See, it existed from the days of Adam. It was during the days of Noah, but it was submerged in the great deluge. And Abraham was guided. They knew, Arabs knew in the days of Abraham that the house of God was in that valley, but they didn't know where the spot is. So God revealed to him, guided him as to where it is, and he excavated it and re-erected it with his son. And since the days of Abraham, Hajj pilgrimage has continued uninterrupted.
There's a question from the Zoom, Mr. Ahmed Sabri.
Yes, Ahmed.
That I want to ask about naming the current state of Misr. Can I ask
What? The what?
Naming of the current state of Misr.
The naming of Misr? Yes. You see, it's a good question. Who started naming Egypt Misr? You see, Europeans never. The Europeans never referred to Egypt as Misr. Only people of the Old Testament named it, and only from the days of the Seleucid, not before. Okay, now Arabs until the days of Muhammad, they said they called it the land of the Copts. There was no Misr in pre-Islamic Arabia, and there were very few connections between Arabs and Egyptians. Most of the commerce was with Syria, with Yemen, and with Ethiopia. In winter, they went to Yemen and Ethiopia, the caravan routes, and in summer they went to Syria. There were no caravan routes to Egypt in pre-Islamic Arabia. So when the first Quran verses that mentioned Misr were revealed in Medina, not in were revealed in Medina, the Muslims went to the Jews and they said, "You are people of the book and you know history better than us. Where is this Misr?" They told them it is Egypt. And from that day, they started calling the Egypt and Copts is the same. They say Copts, yeah. So from that day, they started calling it Misr. But it's a misnomer. They were misguided by the Jews of Arabia. In pre-Islamic Arabia, the term Misr was not known. They used Bilad al-Qabt. In the correspondence of Muhammad with the chief, with Al-Muqawqas, the leader of Egypt, who was in Alexandria, he wrote to him as the chief of the Copts. And he gave him, he sent him Maria. Maria is called as, he took her as a wife. And she was called Maria the Coptic, never the Masriya. So, Maria al-Qibtiyya.
Any more questions?
Very quick things. So, how did the Jews go from Arabia to Palestine? You said that there was, when they started fighting with the Muslims, they went, but they were there before. And Then we did have in Jerusalem in Palestine, Bethlehem, all these things. What happened? Number one. Number two, even before, when the Nebuchadnezzar came and took the Jews to captivity, okay, he took them from Arabia or from Palestine?
From Arabia. This is what Tabari, Masoudi, and Hamadani said. So after that, they returned to Mecca. Because as I said, Ezra led the last group that came back from Babylon to Mecca. And Herodotus was a contemporary of Ezra. He didn't hear about the Jews or about Ezra or anything. Now, what happened? Their cousins, the Edomites. The Edomites are the Adnanites. The Adnanites. They were their cousins, but they were their top enemies. The Israelites always suppressed and ruled the Adnanites. So when Nebuchadnezzar came to Mecca, initially the Adnanites fought with him because he was invading Arabia. But then they collaborated with him against their cousins in Mecca. So due to this collaboration, he made them in charge of Arabia. He said, anybody who makes trouble, you exile him to me, to Babylon. So all the Arab tribes went under the Adnani tribes for protection. Okay, now there were those who did not accept this. They said, we will not accept this. So they started migrating. The migration took place to a large degree after the fall of the Achaemenian Empire. You see, the first Persian Empire granted protection to all the minorities. So the Israelites, keeping their religion, was protected by Cyrus, by Cambyses, by Darius, whatever. When Alexander came, Al-Achaemeniyin, Achaemenians, Achaemenids. Yeah, Achaemenids or Achaemenians. Anyhow, the great migration started, or most of the oppression took place after the fall of the Achaemenian Empire when Alexander the Great came. See, Alexander took over Mesopotamia all the way to India and Afghanistan, and took over the Levant and took over Egypt. However, he died short of occupying Arabia. He had intended to move to Yemen, to Arabia Felix, and to create a capital, the capital of his empire in Arabia Felix, but he died short of that. So the people who came after him were no more interested in conquering Arabia. So what happened? Arabia became free. After the Assyrians, the Chaldeans, and the Achaemenids, Arabia became free. So the Adnanites started suppressing the Israelites further. Previously, they were protected by the empire, but now there was no more imperial protection. So so people, they told them, either you change your religion, your monotheistic religion, and you become polytheistic like us, or you have to leave. So the same, you can, the same thing was replicated, if you want, in Andalusia after the fall of Andalus. They told the Muslims and the Jews, the Christians, either you become Christian or you leave. So the majority stayed behind because they wanted to keep their land. They said, we will pretend that we became Christians, but from inside we will stay Muslims and we will keep to prayer and fasting at home, etc. But we know from history that 5 generations later, this will disappear. 5 generations later, they will forget all about their origin. When you stop saying the grandfather of my grandfather told me, خلاص. So the same thing must have happened in Arabia, because they entered the Jahiliyyah period and they forgot all about their ancestors. And they used cover names. So they used the word Jirham. So they said the history of Jirham is the name of one of the kings of Israel. So they said the Jirham, not the Israelite period. And with time, the Jahiliyyah, very, very few people were educated. So over 1,000 years, all of this was forgotten. Now, thanks to the DNA, we can find out, trace back people back to their origin thousands of years ago.
Can I ask you something? I don't want to stray out of the, but it seems strange because the first speaker that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, made a political pact with the Jews in Medina, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So what happened? I know there was a rift.
The rift started when the Qibla was changed. Exactly. Right after the Qibla was changed, the rift happened 1.5 years later. Right after that. Prior to that, they were very close friends and neighbors, and they would borrow money from each other and they will invite each other. It was that point. The Qibla is the turning point. This is the whole issue.
Question about Abraham. Now, you're stating that Abraham is from the Arabian Peninsula.
Yeah.
But all along we're told that Abraham came from Ur, which
Yes.
is in Egypt.
Iraq.
Iraq, Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
So this is
yes. Ur of the Chaldeans. There were no Chaldeans in the days of Abraham. The Chaldeans came 1,012 and 200 years after Abraham. So there were no Chaldeans in the days of it was the higher of Khildan. It's all about language. It's not Ur. It should be read as higher of the Khalidis, not Chaldees. Khalidis are in Riyadh area, and the higher is now today the southern port of Riyadh.
And if you want to buy your book, you should get it in Arabic, not in English, because language here is saying.
If you know Arabic well, I recommend the Arabic version. If you're not strong in Arabic, you're welcome to read the English. And if you are very good in Arabic, I recommend reading the At-Turaf al-Ma'thur to see where I got this from, the large volume. It took me 22 years to finish. If I had not taken that sabbatical leave, it would have taken until 2027 to finish. 247 chapters I rewrote in the original Arabic. That should. I showed the way they should be read. I kept faithful to the original text in the first line. So anybody is welcome to repeat what I did. The third line has the translation of Van Dyck, but the second line I showed how the first line should be read. And if you read it, you will know the true names of the places. So I did not invent. So when 700 names coincide, I cannot be, it's not one chapter or one paragraph. It is 1,200 pages, all material from the Old Testament. I could not have continued if I did not know that I'm on the right track. And it took me a long time. Thanks to passion put in me that I have put so much effort since 1984. But I never complained. I was happy all along to do it.
Was your book banned in Saudi Arabia?
No,
because the Kamal Sadiqi, they banned his book because they thought if Israel reads it, they will want to claim Saudi Arabia.
His books now. Now with the rule of Ibn Salman, things have changed. Now the books of Dr. Salibi are allowed in Saudi Arabia. My first book was allowed for research purposes. Okay, you can find them at all the exhibitions, book exhibitions. The first book, the second book was allowed. You can find it at Jarir in Saudi Arabia. Okay, the English books you can find it. You can find it here at Virgin, at Antoine. But I brought them here. If I said if anybody is interested at a nominal price, actually less than half the price, because this is the publisher gives me copies at a much lower rate, and I don't want to make any money out of my.
Question.
Yes. Yes. Yes, Adrian.
Where were the children of Israel situated between the reign of David and Solomon? When did the northern clans move to offer the death of Solomon crossed by Jeroboam? And Yemen is the land allowed to evacuate the number of sons of David? Does that make sense? Question. And how do I get a copy of the English translation of the books? He's in the UK.
He's in the yeah, from Amazon. Amazon. You will get it in the UK. You will get it in one day through Amazon. But in the days of Jeroboam, when the kingdom was divided, the southern kingdom was in Mecca. The capital was Mecca. The capital of the north was Asfan. Asfan, it is northeast of Jeddah today. I delineated very well the lands of the 12 tribes in the section of Joshua in the Mecca Bible. Okay, and I spoke about the division and how it took place and where the lands of each tribe was. So, Adrian, as you are well versed in the Old Testament, you'll be able to understand the places, and you can use the QR code at the end of the book to see all the major cities that you know of in the north and in the south parts of the kingdom. Okay, you will have no problem finding them. I wish you were well versed in Arabic, because you would have enjoyed it to a great extent, but still the English book is very good. I'm sure you will like it. It has so much information. So good luck. If you want.